We welcome now from Washington, Senator Chuck Grassley. He is a Republican from Iowa, and importantly, he is the chairman of the Finance Committee. Mr. Senator, thank you very much for joining us today, sir.
Thank you, David.
So let's start with the shutdown, and then we'll move on to other issues. With respect to the shutdown, isn't it the position of the Republican senators to really solve this thing? It doesn't appear that Nancy Pelosi and Donald Trump, the Speaker and the President, will solve it, but can't you, Republicans in the Senate, really fix it?
We will fix it, but only as an agreement that Schumer and the President agreed to last December, that what good does it do for the Senate to do something if the President won't sign it? So back then, Schumer said that the agreement is we'll go with what the President will sign. So then we've had this standoff since Pelosi's become Speaker, because I think Schumer's responding to her leadership on this. So the President over the weekend, or maybe Monday, put a plan on the table because they demanded that he said what he wanted to spend the money for, a detailed plan, and then he immediately expect offer in opposition to that. And normally that would bring you, when one side wants to spend $6 billion and the other one wants to spend, let's say, $1.6 billion, then, you know, kind of cut it down the middle. And then for Republicans, probably have to give a little bit more than the Democrats will give. There's an opportunity from my point of view, because this was in a bill that I had before the Senate in February that didn't get 60 votes, but do something for the DACA kids. And there can be a win in this for everybody if we can just get Pelosi to put something on the table, and you can't negotiate just from one side.
Absolutely right. And you've talked about a bipartisan approach. We've talked to Richard Perdue, one of your colleagues from Georgia. We've talked to Joe Manchin from West Virginia. And there seems to be a lot of senators who are saying there's stuff here for both sides, for the dreamers as well as for money for the wall. But if you all got together and agreed on that, I know you'd like to have the president along, but you could overcome the veto if you had the Senate Republicans go together with the House Democrats. Why isn't that a solution?
Well, we ought to be passing something that the president's going to sign, not something that's going to be delayed by a veto. We need to get this done very quickly, and that's with the president's signature.
We have a viewer actually calling in, and I'll say what they would like me to ask you, sir, is why don't the Republicans just have a straight-up vote on the budget?
Because the number one responsibility of the federal government is national security, and the safety of American people are affected, and lives are affected when fentanyl and other drugs cross the border, or terrorists cross the border. There aren't very many terrorists crossing the border, but there's a lot of criminals crossing the border. And these are things that you back up with very strong statistics that the government keeps, that we can prove that. So we should be doing things that protect the borders and protect the American people. And that's not this Republican's judgment. That's the judgment of the people that are responsibility for border security, the Border Patrol people. They're testifying to this all the time. Who's going to argue with making sure that murderers don't come across the street or across the border and kill a San Francisco policeman that's happened, or the people that are dying every day from drugs that cross the border?
Right. So sooner or later, we will get past this government shutdown. So let's talk about how you move forward. As I say, you're the chairman of the Finance Committee in the Senate. Let's talk about your agenda. And one specific question at the beginning. A couple of days ago now, Bloomberg reported that the president might use the State of the Union address for ask for expanded power over trade. You have been outspoken in presidential authority versus the Congress. Actually, the Constitution gives you a lot of responsibility. Have you heard anything from the White House about requests for expanded authority for the president over trade?
No, but advise them not to do it, and I would advise that since the Constitution gives not just significant authority to the Congress on international and foreign trade, total authority to the Congress of the United States. Now, as far as negotiating with other countries, we've learned since the 1930s, 535 members of Congress can't negotiate with other countries very well, so we give the president some authority to negotiate, but quite frankly, in the 74 legislation and the 1963 legislation, we've delegated too much authority, and I'm for curbing some of that authority.
Do you expect to proceed with legislation to curb, for example, the Section 232 authority that's been used?
At this point, I'm not going to. It would affect 232 primarily, but I wouldn't want to go beyond a lot of things with 301. But 301 probably deals with more reform of the WTO, which would not be the responsibility of the Congress, but working with the other countries in WTO to speed up decision-making there. But as far as 232 is concerned, I don't have a specific piece of legislation, but I've spoken very favorably to what Senator Ernst and Senator Portman have put forward in regard to that. I'm not endorsing that legislation right now because we have to find a bipartisan solution, but I think it's been too much authority delegated by the Congress. Now, you know, right now it's very volatile between the legislative branch and the executive branch. Maybe when Kennedy was president, there was more cooperation and there was more confidence, but I think now that confidence has been reduced.
Another important trade issue that involves Iowa, particularly the farmers in Iowa, is North American trade. And you were quoted as saying that you would favor the president pulling out of NAFTA if the Democrats tried to change the deal. Now, as I understand it, you may be changing that position a bit. What is your position on the USMCA?
Well, I'm not changing my position. I actually stated what the headline said, but they left out what I said before that. I said, surely the Democrat questions about USMCA wouldn't lead to a point where they would object to what the president's done, mostly to satisfy unions and manufacturing in America. They wouldn't want to do away with NAFTA and go back to the high tariffs that Mexico had against our products going in there, and our lower tariffs. That would be worst environment than we even have with NAFTA. So at that point of frustration, I said the president has a real lever to push the Democrats to reach an agreement. Now, the Democrats have some legitimate concerns that I think, as chairman of the committee, working with Senator Wyden, we have to consider. But I hope they're all can be considered short of renegotiation, because that's a no-brainer not to renegotiate. So that would be labor and environment and enforcement. And there are certain things we can do short of amending NAFTA that ought to solve their problems. And I'm going to sit down with Democrats and see what we can work out in that area.
Right. And finally, Senator, there's been a lot of talk about drug pricing. Is that an area where actually Republicans and Democrats can come together in this new Congress? Certainly the president has been outspoken. Yeah. We've heard from the Democrats. As you look forward, is that something we could expect some legislation on?
Without a doubt. In fact, I've already been involved over the last few years as chairman of the Judiciary Committee in legislation with Klobuchar to do away with pay for delay. Another one under the acronym CREATES with Leahy to promote that legislation. I introduced yesterday with Klobuchar a bill for the importation of drugs, so we got competition to drive down prices. I think there's some things that we can do. I very much support Part D of Medicare, and I still don't want the government negotiating and reducing the formulary for drugs that our senior citizens can have. But there are some things that can be changed within Part D that ought to lower drug prices.
Okay, Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa, thank you so very much for being with us from Capitol Hill today. Back to you, Alex.